Hello everybody, and welcome to this Screen and KFTV Talk, sponsored by the St. Petersburg Clearwater Film Commission. I'm Chris Evans, the locations editor for both titles. Today we've gathered some leading location experts to discuss how different the worldwide location landscape will look as we emerge from the virus and what the industry can do to prepare for filming again. Before we start, a few bits of housekeeping. I will moderate a 30-minute discussion with our panelists before we open it up to questions from you, our live audience. If you have a question, please use the Q&A button in Zoom. My colleague Orlando is helping to moderate today's panel, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. Right, let me introduce you to our panelists. We have Mike Fantasia, President of the Location Managers Guild International, and a vastly experienced location manager and production supervisor, who has worked on over 30 major films, including Top Gun Maverick and The Amazing Spider-Man. We also have Tony Armour, who is the film commissioner of the St. Petersburg Clearwater Film Commission in Florida. Tony covers 24 cities in Pinellas County and works with hundreds of productions each year. He is also an award-winning filmmaker himself. We also have Sam Breckman, a veteran line producer and unit production manager, whose list of credits include his Dark Materials, Tomb Raider, and Bourne 5. We also have Michael Moffat, who is co-founder and managing director of the Production Service Network, a one-stop shop built to help producers determine where best to film overseas. And finally, we have Suresh Sivagnanam, CEO of VDoc, a video consultation doctor service providing members with access to medical facilities around the world. He has extensive knowledge about healthcare, including measures that need to be taken in these tough coronavirus times. So, these are indeed very tough times, but interestingly, it looks like several countries are now finally opening up to filming again, like Iceland, South Korea, Australia, Greece, Spain, and even the UK. As they ease restrictions, but is this still mostly for local productions? When are we likely to see an influx of international productions heading back into these countries? Is it going to be a staggered approach, smaller productions first? What about the problems with quarantine periods? Mike Fantasia, perhaps you kick us off.
Well, there's still a lot of uncertainty. Here in the States, we have our various unions and guilds working together with industry, the major studios, trying to come up with a comprehensive protocol that the majors can use here. I've spoken with various heads of production at studios and safety consultants at the studios, and they're really still struggling. There's such a wide range of productions, from small independents to large features. The same protocol won't work for everybody.
Yes.
We're hoping within the next week or 10 days to have a protocol laid out that's been agreed to by industry and our unions and guilds that'll help sort of set the stage. And that'll be like a baseline. And from there, based on whether you're heavily on location, what kind of locations, are you indoors, are you outdoors, are you on stage? I think productions will then use that baseline to work from and adjust how they operate accordingly. My understanding is some offices are going to be opening up in a couple of weeks at a small scale. Only those who need to be in offices will be there. The rest of the folks, our department especially, will be working remotely. They'll ramp up slowly. They'll monitor people's health. If somebody is infected, they'll sort of back up, start all over again. We're really, we're inventing as we go. And I think there's going to be fits and starts. Everybody's concerned. Nobody wants to get sick, but everybody wants to get back to work. So we're all just anxious to see what the studios and the guilds and unions come up with as sort of a baseline. Speaking with some union folks a couple of days ago, they don't think really production is going to crank up until September, maybe October, actual filming. But I think throughout the summer, we're going to be seeing offices open up and sort of some experimentation, some scientific experimentation being conducted to see how we can roll things out.
A quick question on the point you raised before. Do you think it's safer doing on-set shooting or on-location shooting, like in the studios or on location?
Well, you know, studios range here in Los Angeles, at least, all kinds of quote unquote studios. You've got studios, you know, 20 and 30, 40,000 square foot sound stages. And then you've got warehouses where people build sets. The protocol is going to be a lot different. I think working on a soundstage at a studio, it's much easier to control. You can create your filtration systems, your buffers between inside and outside. You can control access much easier than you can in an old warehouse, if you will. We have a lot of small 0 to 10,000 square foot warehouses that are used for stages that are going to be much more difficult to control. They don't have good air circulation systems. They've got a lot of access points. So I mean, ultimately, the best thing you can do is be shooting exterior locations, people outdoors, not on a soundstage or not inside a location. Unfortunately, most projects aren't shot totally outdoors. I think, just generally speaking, you're going to be a lot safer working outdoors than indoors. You're going to be a lot safer on a soundstage than in someone's home or a restaurant or a retail location.
Michael, do you want to come in there? Because I know you've already started, you at PSN, your partners, have started doing productions already, both on location and in studios. What have you found so far? What issues have you faced?
Well, one thing I'd like to start off just by mentioning what Mike had pointed out. There's an interesting point he said about being safer on an outdoor location. As an anecdote, we right now, our partners are in more than 50 film hubs around the world, and more than 30 of them are already filming live action. The cameras are rolling. Now, mind you, this is shorter format. This is mostly commercial productions, and I would say that really what we're looking at is that as far as the service company perspective, you're going to see the service companies, the ones who are executing on foreign shoots, actually getting their feet wet with all of this, you know, the protocols already, so that by the time that the studios, as Mike had suggested, by the time they get ready and they're prepared to launch into a production, you know, and also almost by nature, they need to travel in with their A-list talent and directors, et cetera. By the time this all happens, the service companies are going to be, I think, really geared up for this. But the interesting anecdote that I wanted to share was that of all these countries, more than 30 that where live action is actually happening, the only one that started with, you know, because many of them started in studio. That was kind of the thinking that we control it. We keep it in this sort of controlled environment, capsulated. Funny enough, the one country that has gone completely against the trend is Ireland. Their outlook is, no, we're only allowing, the first step is outdoors. And I think that's very intriguing. I personally agree with Mike. I'm very curious to understand the logic, but it's just been a trend that we've seen.
I was going to ask Sam, what form do you think these film and TV projects will take in this new climate? Are the days of doing an 8-episode show and traveling to 5 different countries done?
Well, I think at the moment, the aviation industry is, along with hostilities or hospitality industry, is being hit very badly. And I think there's certainly going to be a reluctance from crew to want to get on a plane. And I think it's whilst Michael's talking about lots of various service companies providing infrastructure and amenities to productions that are filming up in those countries, I just don't think that certainly the British, aren't going to be traveling, and I don't see I don't see a lot of us traveling anywhere soon, which is a shame. It will come back, but this morning I was listening on the news, and we're getting to a point now where everyone talks about the curve and the R numbers coming down, and it's all lovely. But now we're starting to talk about when's the next spike going to come. And if you look at people now starting to get restless about being locked down, and then saying, well, okay, it's all finished now, we can crack on, and no, you can't. And I think we've got to be very mindful of that and worried about people's sensibilities in our own crews who are concerned about the issue. We're best mates. We've all known each other for 20, 30 years. But now we're in this strange world where we've got to separate ourselves, and we've also got to look at how our industry functions. Have we got too big? Are we now reducing crew sizes? Are we now looking at a whole different way of making films? And I think the big blockbusters temporarily for the moment, I think we've got to be very sensible about the game. Are we making Room, Marriage Stories, stuff like that? And we're not making the big blockbuster, massive extras. We've got to be much smaller. And I think we're doing small films, we're doing small television. Content is king. And at the moment, everyone during lockdown has been watching content, and content is running out. And when we hit the end of the year, there ain't going to be any content to go. And there's only so many repeats of shows that were 15, 20 years old, that were major successes, that we're going to watch again. So we are going to come back as an industry. But and as Mike said, there's got all the scenarios that we've got about how we work together in order to produce something, all the different scenarios coming out of all the different countries. There's a world in which I think we as an industry, whether it's England, Ireland, Spain, France, America, have to have a unified approach to how we make films. And I think the day of saying, oh, we'll decide tomorrow and then we'll start filming, and no, it's planning now. And the day of a director or producer saying, we'll make that up next week. No, you won't. You'll be making it up 12 weeks before you film it, because when you turn around and say, we want this tomorrow, I'm going to say, I can't do it, because I can't put 4 people in a room and making the product that we need to make it happen tomorrow. They need 3 weeks now. So
there's a lot to consider, isn't there, logistically speaking? I mean, and how do you tackle these issues, such as health and safety guidelines or protocols for each country, pre-testing for antibodies, quarantining sets, bringing equipment and crew in from different countries, maintaining social distancing. There's mental health of crew, obviously, if they're working longer hours with less crew. There are a lot of things to factor in, aren't there, Sam?
Yeah, I do think, and as Michael said, that we are now in a world where what we're doing now is, I think, going to be the norm. We, as certainly my position, I don't need to be at a studio. I don't need to be on a location. I can have conversations like this, as strange as it's going to be, for the next 6 months. I'm glad, listen, I'm not on hiatus like some of the films that had started. And I pity that, I worry about how they approach it. If I get picked up on, because we haven't been working since March the 23rd, if I get picked up on a job that starts in July, August, in pre-prep, I'm not going to be filming till next year. So at least we'll have set up a criteria. We'll know how we're moving forward. But in the short term, it's who was stopped, the Spider-Mans, the Jurassic Parks. How do they approach it? How do they move in to this brave new world in which there's going to be huge changes? And we've got a lot of dinosaurs out there who aren't going to be able to cope with those changes. And we have to do it for the sake of all of our individuals, from the lowest person, the cleaner, to the producers. We are all in the same boat. And I think...
Agreed.
Yeah.
Extending from that, I mean, what sort of conversations are you having with producers? Tony, what sort of conversations are you having at the moment with productions and producers looking to shoot in Florida in particular?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So our statewide organization, Film Florida, last week came out with a list of recommendations for safe and clean set policies and procedures. And Deadline covered it, and some other national organizations, because Florida happened to be the first state in the country that actually came out with this. And, since there are a lot of social distancing restrictions still in place, one of the things in our area is we're big for the commercial industry here. And so, we just actually approved our first permit today to shoot this week. And it's just a small, digital production with a crew of 5 people. So, at first we're seeing these smaller crews, these smaller productions, 10 or less. If they're going to scale up a little bit, how do you separate those people into pods so that you're keeping, these 10 people separate? And, being a tourism destination with, 35 miles of beaches, our exteriors are a lot of where people want to film. So being outside, like Mike and Sam have talked about, is something that's, sort of beneficial to filming here. So I'm fielding a lot of calls from Los Angeles and from other parts of the country on, hey, when can we come? What can we film? What are the restrictions? How can we do these things? And one of the big things that it's going to boil down to, and that I keep telling people over and over, is it really depends on to the comfort level of your cast and crew. How comfortable?
Yeah, that's vital, isn't it?
Yeah, how comfortable are your cast and crew? And I was having conversations with the Hallmark Channel yesterday, because we've had several Hallmark films that have shot here and looking at getting something else. They have a pipeline. They normally do 100 movies a year, and they haven't been able to shoot any of those. So they're trying to ramp up and see what they can do. And one big concern of theirs and other productions like that are is with the unions, with SAG in particular. How is talent going to travel? Are they allowed to travel? And so much of the conversation then also boils around insurance.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, that's a key talking point, isn't it?
Yeah. So from the 24 cities that I work with, their insurance requirements are not changing as far as what's required to approve a permit. But from the other side, from the production side, from everybody when I've talked to, insurance is not going to cover if anyone gets sick. So a lot of productions, and most, are going to require waivers be signed by cast and crew that say, you're risking potentially getting sick if you work on this project, and here's a waiver that you have to sign saying that if you do get sick, it's on you. And so then how do those waivers run counter to union contracts? And so those are conversations that have to be had with you. There's so much that goes into it that starting out, we're just seeing these little small ones. I'm getting a lot of micro budget productions now that are, sub $200,000 feature films that can shoot on a shoestring budget with minimal crew that want to come and shoot their, whatever the film is. And it's going to take time, like, Sam was just saying, on these big tent poles and how those are going to scale up and how those are going to work. So I think, as you approach the end of this year and Q1 for 2021, and that content need that's going to be out there, it's a huge opportunity for these small, low budget productions to have an opportunity to get maybe broader distribution than they normally would, because the big projects aren't going to be ready.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And extending from that, Suresh, what about the health, safety, and medical issues that you need to factor in as well? What do they need to consider when traveling to the countries? And obviously, once there and filming on set, especially outdoors, what are some of the key issues they need to factor in?
I think what's really been interesting is hearing everyone. I think the issue is travel. I mean, we've got people traveling into countries now who effectively are saying, look, am I safe coming in? In terms of the stuff that we've been advising governments on, it follows two things: test, inform, and protect. So the idea is, testing people is one thing, and all of us are probably heard about antibody tests and PCR tests and antigen tests. We're living in an imperfect world. There's no vaccination. And for the next 12 months, until there's a vaccination, we've got to effectively adjust in terms of how we operate, protocols, pathways, and how we're looking after people, which is really important. So we have this test, inform, and protect. So the test bit is effectively the antigen test, the antibody test, a combination of both, to effectively give people the confidence that you're actually testing people, your crew, people who are coming into a particular environment. Inform is really important because it's not only clinical, it's also environmental as well, and HR. So there's a number of things that we effectively look there. So in terms of informing, we have doctors, occupational health physicians talking to companies, HR consultants, for example, advising on risk, on employee on the employee situation as well. And environmental is how you're changing the way you're working in a particular office. So, for example, are you bringing everyone in a week? Probably not. It's probably half the workforce, another half of all. Does everyone need to be in that place at the same time? And that's really important in terms of how you stagger the amount of people that you will have, for example, on a production set, because effectively it is about social distancing. It's about effectively PPE. Interestingly enough, the pathways that everyone follows are no different from industry to industry. And ultimately, in terms of the test, inform, protect. So ultimately, if you're looking at the film industry, it's still the same things. I mean, I was talking to my team on Monday, and this is quite interesting as well in terms of the confidence that you've got to give the people that you're working with. So it might not only be the confidence on location. I actually said, for example, to my team, look, I will pay for your Ubers to get into work so you don't have to go on public transport. And the first thing that I was hit with, well, how do we know that the Uber's not? So it's that. So we've been in a lockdown situation for about 8-9 weeks now, whatever it is. And you've got that mental barrier of, I'm going to leave my house. As soon as I step outside my house, I'm unsafe. It's a whole pathway that we're talking about, not only about the location or the work environment, it's how that person gets to work as well. It's a tough one. I mean, I can't remember who mentioned it, but about travel, staycations are going to be big. Yeah, so no one will, I think the staycation business in the UK and other countries is going to be huge. So I think what we've all got to try and do, certainly from the discussions and the presentations that I've been having with various industry leaders, is ultimately there's going to be less travel. You know, we've seen the airline industry and the holiday and the tourism industry take a real hit. Now, in terms of how we will live our lives for the next 12 to 18 months, and it is all about the vaccination. It really is. You know, and I hate to say it, that, you know, my belief is that, you know, unless we do all sort of look at a pathway that we're adhering to, there is a possibility of a second, you know, spike, you know, and I think that's the worry as well. It's the fact that what have we learned in the last few weeks to make sure that we are protected, or we're protecting ourselves as individuals and as businesses for something else that can hit us in 3 or 4 months. And the reason why to say this is because you've probably all heard it. Even if you've had COVID and you have antibodies, some of us don't even develop any antibodies. There's no proof that you're immune for it for a second time round. And that's a real issue just generally. Hence the reason why antibody testing and is one thing, but the vaccination is basically what we're all looking for.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I mean, there are so many interesting points there, and you're right in terms of potentially in countries like in Germany, for example, where they eased a lot of restrictions and then potentially had, you know, more cases erupt as a result. So it must be very hard for producers when considering where to shoot for their forthcoming projects, depending on the situation in that particular country or state. I mean, could they look at alternatives, maybe some smaller, safer countries, perhaps? Sam?
It goes back to the traveling, Chris. I can't see, and Mike can maybe confirm this, and Tony, that Americans aren't going to be getting on a plane anytime soon to come over to the UK, irrespective of the rebate. And if they come over, as we know, is it the end of this month or in the next week or so, there's a 2-week quarantine period. And we don't know, as Suresh has just said, there will be a second spike. And if we don't keep ourselves to ourselves, which is unlikely to happen because people are becoming, after 8 weeks, we're going stir crazy. There will be, I think, exactly as Tony said, it's smaller, independent little units that are making films. How does the makeup get near an artist? You know, we're all saying that there's a 2.5 meter distance, but a makeup artist has got to be there. The mic being put on the artist, the radio mic. There's all these things that we can talk about. There's an element of trust, and oh yeah, we've known each other. You're filming for 5 days. You then at the weekend, do you say to all your crew, right, you can't go to the wedding, the 50 people at the wedding or the 180 people at the wedding, because one of them could have it, you'll bring it back to set. So are you, for a 22-week tentpole film shoot, quarantining yourself? You can't go through your life like that. And I think, but we've got to be sensible. We're in an industry where we do work very closely together. And that's why I think we're smaller units, much smaller production modules going around. And I think the whole thing of the staycation is there's a world out there where the stories happen on our doorstep, and a smaller unit. There aren't going to be as many people employed as there were in the previous. Maybe our industry's got too bloated. Unions aside, Mike, I think there is a point where we just got to say, sorry, you can't have an assistant of an assistant of an assistant anymore. You've got one. And by the way, and there was the Australian model, the pod model, which I thought was brilliant, that's saying, well, maybe people now have to, the electrician has to be part of the grips package. To be on set. I saw them doing that, on Neighbours, 2 or 3 people. You can't have 30 people. It's got to be 2 or 3. And ultimately, you've got to protect the talent. Because if the talent gets sick, you're screwed. But if your boom op gets sick, you go and get another one. Admittedly, you've got to go into the quarantine thing. And there's another element of, do we then, 2 weeks prior to engagement, everyone has to have a test. Now, are the tests out there at the moment to give a crew of 100 a test before we come there, and we all then sign our piece of paper saying, here's the test results, there you go, I am clear. But that does not guarantee for 22 weeks of filming that you're going to be clear every weekend.
No, precisely.
And that's the problem. And yes, we'll all be sensible because we're sensible people, most of us.
Yeah, quite. Actually, I mean, it's an interesting point, but also with actors and crew, will they potentially have to sign a waiver then, do you think? Mike, Sam?
There's a lot of talk about waivers. Last Saturday night, I just happened to a text message to a former production manager, now a physical production vice president at one of the major studios here in town, just about some personal stuff. A friend of ours passed away, non-COVID related, but I just want to let her know that. So at midnight on Saturday night, we're going back and forth about things. And I said, what about waivers? She said, waivers are as good as the paper they're written on, you know, especially in this country, which is so litigious. You can sign a waiver and turn around and sue somebody the next day. My union business agent a couple of days ago said, we're not signing it. We're telling our members to not sign waivers. We've had, in the past, we've had all kinds of waivers put in front of us regarding liability if we're driving crew and all kinds of other things. They forbid us from signing waivers. So I think waivers are going to be very contentious with the unions and the guilds. I don't think, we're just so litigious that they're really not worth the paper they're written on. Just speaking with some, we have this thing called coffee talks on Tuesdays, the Location Managers Guild, and we've had 40, 50, 60 people on each of 2 calls the last 4 or 5 weeks. I would say of the people that, I've only been on a couple of the calls, but I've talked to a lot of people afterwards, and very few people are willing to sign waivers. It's just such a contentious issue. Something that Suresh was talking about, a vaccine. Do you think if there is a treatment that comes to light in the next 2 or 3 or 4 months, how do you think, and I don't mean to take over the moderator position here.
No, by all means, go ahead.
How do you think crews will react to that? If there's a proven, effective treatment for COVID, do you think that will affect how folks roll out into production again?
I think it's a game changer. I mean, of course, I think that's the thing. Just in medicine, I've been in healthcare now for 25 years, and you know, the key thing now in terms of the clinical pathway is the vaccination. You know, I remember the flu vaccine came a few years ago, and it was like, okay, right, everyone's now going to be protected. It's going to help. It's going to help them to reduce deaths. It is a game changer. The reason why it's a game changer is this pandemic has caused so much fear globally that, you know, testing is one thing, and just I think just for the viewers in terms of the difference between tests, the PCR test, which is the antigen test, which is the swab test, tells you whether you're COVID positive, and it tells you if you're contagious. The antibody test, which is what we hear about, you know, globally about your 15, 20-minute wonder test, actually, in the scheme of things, doesn't really tell us that much. What it does tell us is that there's a possibility that you may have had COVID in the past. There's a possibility that you have your IgG, which is effectively your antibody within your system, and that's it. So even if you have those antibodies in your system, what we don't know is whether those antibodies are strong enough to stop you getting it again. Hence why the vaccination is so important. Mm. So that protocol in terms of testing, and I think it was Sam who mentioned, absolutely, I could have a test today, be COVID-free. Tomorrow, I could be COVID positive. Yeah. And that's the issue. It's only a point in time that it can say to you, right, today you were COVID negative. The key thing about this, it is imperfect. That's the problem. But we have to de-risk globally. We have to de-risk from a country perspective and from industry perspectives.
Just quickly before we turn to the audience questions, are there any positives out of all this? Obviously, there are a lot of factors to consider, but there must be some positives. For example, the ways of working might be better going forward. There might be a better impact on the environment with the way that things are going. What are your thoughts in terms of positivity? Tony, perhaps start with that.
Yeah, I think a little bit of what Sam mentioned earlier is scaling back these bloated productions. I think we've gotten so used to having so many people on set. I know a number of times, whether it's productions I've worked on or going to set, and you're looking around and being like, why do we need all these people? Half of them, or more than half of them, are standing around doing nothing most of the time, it seems like. So not that we want to cost people jobs by any means, but maybe, we're forced to run more efficiently, a little leaner. And, a big question is always cost. How are we going to afford to pay for these extra precautions and procedures that we have to do, to make sure we have a safe and healthy set? And, I think unfortunately, some of that is going to be in reducing crews. That crew money is going to reduce, and you're going to have less crew, and that's going to go into your safety precautions instead.
Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. Let's go to some questions now from the audience. Let's start with Blair Agnew, who asks, what can be done in pre-production that can allow production teams to navigate the new reality better? Sam, do you want to start maybe?
It's a virtual, if I look at the films I normally work on, there's 22 to 26 weeks prep. Well, you're starting virtually. You don't have any crafts coming on board till maybe 15 weeks out. So everything you're doing is like this, is Zoom, Skype, Portal, which I've invested in. It's a whole world. And we don't need to be. The days of 50 people in a meeting room all discussing the set have sadly, for the moment, gone. And if they'll come back, I don't know. I'd like to think creatively, that's how we all work. We listen and we engage and we all buzz off each other. I think this is the new buzz, the six of us. This feels really good, but can you make a production from it? I believe you can, but it's a different psychology. It's a different mindset. And there's some people that will cope with that, and there's some people that won't. But it involves planning. And planning is something that we're not good at. We're good at reacting, but some people are not good at planning. And I think there's going to be a point where, as producers and directors and the likes of the line producers and executives have got to say, right, 20 weeks out, what are we making? And we have to make decisions today, not the day before we film it, but today. So I think there's a virtual world we inhabit for 10, 15 weeks. And once we start then bringing the trades on, it's then, for me anyway, if I start June, July, I'm not going to be bringing trades on until the end of the year. And then we'll have established some pattern of working. And I think at the moment, it's just a brave new world, which none of us wants to dip our toe in the water and say, this is how we should do it. Because that toe will be bitten off the next day when a stress says that someone's testing positive. And he said, well, hold on, why are they positive now? They weren't yesterday. If we listen to Mr. Trump, obviously, his poor press people are all suffering because one day they're clear, the next day they've got it. Oh, how amazing is that? Who would have thought? So yeah, it's a very odd, cynical world. But I think
indeed
there's a plan out there. It's just which is the best plan.
And Michael, your response to the question as well?
Yeah, I think one thing, just carrying on what Sam said, is that the calendar comes so much into play here. I've seen many discussions and had discussions about projects where it's a big studio project. They're not even looking at doing anything until next year. Some projects have just been entirely pushed to the following year. Other things which are smaller scale, as Tony had suggested, are being contemplated and looked at how they might be able to happen in the fall. And this, of course, is presuming that we don't experience any significant spikes. So, we're all kind of walking on eggshells here, but certainly I think the biggest projects, that likewise are going to have the longest ramp up period are the ones that are just getting pushed to next year with almost without discussion, because it just cannot, at the moment, the industry can't get its head around trying to make that happen with all the requisites that they would have. But I would ask the question here in our group is that if you look at what is a global production, a big project that might be shooting overseas in many different countries at a given stage, when we talk about smaller units, one of the interesting things might be adapting the production, and perhaps Mike, you can speak to this, the idea of leaning more on second units to capture plates and whatnot, and then bring those into studios. I mean, The Mandalorian did some amazing things that also had backgrounds that were actually shot, but then manipulated in a studio environment. And so I just wonder if perhaps there is a possibility that we see some projects now. Maybe they were going to shoot in the Canary Islands, but they're nervous about that. And so instead they decide to send the second unit out to shoot the plates they need and bring it back to LA and, make it happen that way.
Well, funny, we've actually,
go ahead, Mike. Yeah.
We've just done that, Michael, on a project at Shepperton where we used the Mandalorian LED screens, and we filmed with, I think we had 6 people on the glaciers in Iceland. We filmed for 3 days, and then we came back to the studio, and that was the most phenomenal technology I've ever seen, and it's getting better and better. That's, I think, the way that we're going forward. We didn't need to go to Iceland, and some of our colleagues who we filmed with in Iceland, great team out there, actually visited us at Shepperton, couldn't tell the difference. Were unable to see the difference between our Icelandic LED screens and the real thing, and that is a testament to that technology. That's the way we did a show with 2 people, and then after pre-Christmas, after Christmas, 5 people. Those are the shows that I think we're going to be making for the next year, maybe. It's the marriage story, small ensemble casts, because it's all, you have to protect your talent. Ultimately, it's all about the talent, and it's how we interact with them. But if the talent are coming to Britain to get our 25% rebate, they're not getting on a plane anytime soon, I don't think. So I think what you've got in Spain will stay in Spain. What will stay in Florida will stay in Florida. And I think we're going to be very staycation. I think you're absolutely right, Suresh. It will be that little world, and that's going to find new talent as well that's out there, people that can take risks, and we'll see new people coming into this industry who can operate with a small unit and make it really very exciting. Maybe this is a chance to get that new talent out there. I don't know.
Yeah, Tony, do you want to pick up on that? Because I'm curious to know your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I've always been a big supporter of new and emerging talent as well. I have a film festival going into it. Well, supposed to happen last weekend, our 15th year here in St. Pete, and been pushed to the fall. And, any opportunity that you have to discover new talent. And that's something that I see, being in Florida and not necessarily Los Angeles all the time, the questions and the calls that I get all the time from all over are, what can I do to break into the industry? How can I do this? How do I get distribution? And we do, all these different panels and workshops. And so I think it's an opportunity for emerging talent to, shoot on these smaller budgets, smaller scale, and get their projects out there.
Fantastic. We've got another question through from Mike Johansson, LMGI. How do we think, it's quite a niche question, how do we think lunch will be handled going forward? French hours, more staggering of the crew, longer lunch breaks, meaning longer days or less productivity? There's only so much capacity in lunchrooms and trailers, and it's usually already very tight, especially in urban locations other than a studio. Mike, did you want to pick up on that?
You're not going to see buffet lines anymore. You're going to have single serve. There might be the food on a buffet type setup, but 45 people are not going to be touching the salad fork. It'll be, I'd like some of this, this, and this. Somebody will serve it to you, close the box up, and you'll go sit. We'll be staggering. A lot of the productions I've worked on in the last 4 or 5 years have had a 4-hour lunch period, just because we don't break. We just go with a 4-hour lunch period. I think that's going to be the norm. I think craft service is going to essentially go away. I'm not sure how they do it outside of the States, but craft service in the US has become, I think, ridiculous. With you have breakfast, then you eat for 6 hours, then you have lunch, then you eat for 6 hours, then you have a second meal. I think craft service is going to be packaged power bars, packaged nuts and raisins, prepackaged things. The days of, we've had a real green initiative here in the States the last few years. A lot of that's going to go away. We're not going to use a water bottle and refill it. We're going to use a single serve, throw it away. Single serve, throw it away. Single serve cutlery. plastic cutlery. It's going to be completely different. I've spoken with a good friend of mine who's a caterer, and he is already changing the way his truck operates. He's already ordering more and different equipment so that he can provide what he is hearing is going to be coming down the pike. It's going to be, I think producers are going to save a lot of money on food and craft service because I've always thought that we're crazy the way we have food on sets. It's just way too much. There's too much waste there. It's 24 hours a day. It's going to be reduced. It's going to be single serve, and there's going to be just a much. Our catering crews are going to be bigger. Our craft service crews are going to be bigger. Not because craft service is serving food, but it's going to be cleaning a lot more, cleaning the sets. And sanitizing. One of the things I wanted, I don't know if this has come up in any of the questions, but it's something that my peers have been discussing, I would say arguing about. Who is going to be in charge of safety? A lot of times here in the States, as a location manager, I deal with lead, I deal with asbestos, I fortify floors that are weak and fix roofs and things like that. I'm happy to do that. Tell you what I'm not happy to do is to declare a set clean and COVID-free. Who's that going to fall to?
Well, supposedly there's going to be coronavirus supervisors, aren't there, on set for production? That's what they're talking about doing anyway.
What is a coronavirus supervisor?
Well, precisely, yeah, they'd have to work out.
Is that a nurse?
Every country's different.
No.
Yeah, quite, exactly.
Who's going to tell the DP, you've got to go home? Who's going to, how's that going to work? How's that going to work?
That's a really interesting question because one of the whole idea, when we started talking about safety protocols, and looking at them internally at our production service network, we were actually getting feedback from the markets and territories that were actually still operating and that didn't close down, like South Korea, Australia, and we were getting some really feedback from them on how they were doing this. And we've seen it, of course, evolve since other markets that have come on, and how are they doing it? And what we notice as a sort of a trend is you've got sort of one line of thought is this medic, nurse sort of character, and then you've got another one which is a risk prevention officer. And I mean, the vocabulary may change a little bit, but these two seem to be somehow intertwined. And then they both would be in communication with the production, basically the head of production on set, who would ultimately be the one working with heads of department to communicate things to, if for example a camera assistant has symptoms, the camera assistant is responsible to go to the DOP and say, look, I'm not feeling well, and the DOP has to flag it with one of the health people, who will then flag it to the production manager, and then that's how they sort of follow that protocol, taking them out. But it has always been, what I've heard, is a deference to production. The health people are there to flag it, and also to ensure that it's not a continued violation, if you will, because ultimately everybody's interested in ensuring the safety of the set. But it's not about a medic coming around and kicking somebody off the set without knowing about it,
No, quite. Suresh, do you want to come in there very quickly with your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what's interesting, and I'm going to use the example here because we've been doing it. The actual porn industry from a number of years ago actually had a great system. And if you looked at and it's no different from what we're talking about here today. So they had this pass system, and ultimately this was the control of HIV. Yeah. So HIV, in terms of back in the day and how that industry worked, and it's a really interesting read when the prevalence of HIV in terms of the late 80s, early 90s, and how that particular industry controlled it in terms of the protocols and the pathways that it took, where it's no different from us carrying an immunity card these days. And what they had was, the actors in that particular industry had a pass card. So, it was HIV testing on a continual basis. And some of the things that I've been hearing just now is no different from what the pathway and the protocol was then, 20 years ago, in terms of how we reduce the spread of HIV. And I think one of the key things about this is about protocol. It's about being pioneering as well. So a couple of things I want to add as well, which is really interesting. I think the group around here can be pioneers in the industry. It just takes one group to start it. I was reading from the hotel. So basically hotels, how they're going to get back. I think Marriott themselves effectively put a whole protocol out yesterday or the day before. This is what we're going to do. This is how you're going to be safe with us. And it just takes that particular company, other airlines, for example, saying, right, when you get onto our plane now, it's a temperature check, it's a face mask. Just whatever you're looking at, guys, in terms of the industry, just be defined, be clear. It's got to be a clear message, and that's it. There is no, because I'll mention it, because we're in an imperfect world, there's no right or wrong answer. It's about effectively de-risking everything.
I completely agree. Okay, well, let's move on to another question. This is actually an anonymous question. So do you think tax credits in different locations and countries will be badly affected with the general decline of economies? Tony, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, right before we hopped on this call, which is why everybody else was on the call and I was a little bit late with the group here as I was slashing my budget. You know, we are funded by hotel bed tax. Well, hotel collections for the month of April are basically nothing. Fortunately, you know, we have everything from last year already, and we're looking at how to parse things out and still maintaining our cash rebate that we have to film here. But, you know, where else can I cut my budget? I'm not going to be taking, you know, a trip to EFM for European film market next year. You know, that's cut out of the budget. But you're trying to preserve. It depends on the state or the country or whatever. But you know, what we're trying to do is preserve our incentive program and cut in other areas. But that incentive program is going to have to come back. So I think on a larger scale, depending on how these programs are funded, that you're going to absolutely see some money getting cut out of them, especially as state budgets. You know, when you're talking the states here, you know, a lot of times it's a hard conversation and you've got different viewpoints on, you know, whether a state should have an incentive program or not. And so this will be a great excuse for those states that want to get rid of it, or those countries that want to cut back on it. So there's going to be some fighting to maintain these programs, but I think you're going to see some cuts.
You know, Tony, if I could jump in on that for a minute, because
go ahead, Michael.
I'm curious, here in Spain, there's almost a contrast on the opposite side of it. And I think, Chris, you're aware of this, that Spain has just bumped up its incentive. And you almost have to think that, oh, they're stepping up their game precisely because it's that moment. I mean, truth be told, it's been in the works for years. And so, I mean, I can tell you that but conveniently speaking, certainly authorities and Spain, you know, is no single case here, but we're all suffering this economically. But the Spanish government has decided, hey, you know, we need to push forward with this because we need to stand out. So while I can imagine a lot of different regions, states, even countries may be under pressure to back down, I just wonder if any of you have heard about others that are also stepping up their game precisely to stand out head and shoulders above the rest.
Well, it's interesting to know, just a little side point to that. Obviously, Spain has raised theirs, but the Canary Islands have raised theirs to potentially 50%, which I find absolutely phenomenal. That's the biggest in the world. And I don't know how they're going to cope with that once the productions do get back up and running. So, sorry, that was just a little side note. I just think it's fascinating. But I'm curious to know, if others wanted to join in there in terms of the tax incentives. Maybe Sam, do you want to join in there?
Well, it's this whole thing of it's all well and good having a country with a tax incentive, but until we get on a plane, it's how valuable.
But you know, Sam, the thing that's interesting about this also is that regionally speaking, I mean, the Americans, for example, flying over to Europe is going to take longer.
Yes.
But there's already talk in Europe about dropping those borders come summertime. I mean, tourism is huge in Europe, and if there is no huge spike, there are a lot of there's a lot of influential people involved in making this happen. And so what I've been seeing, and this push is not just driving across borders. I mean, the thing I just read in the paper today was saying that, you know, specifically it's also for airline travel within Europe. That'll be sort of a little bit like the US might be doing in between states as things hopefully level off. The same thing is what's being talked about in Europe. And this does include the UK, by the way.
Thanks.
One thing that'd be interesting, is the state of Georgia here in the United States is arguably number one or number two or number three, depending on how you look at it in film production. They're opening up. They still have cases increasing. It'll be interesting to see how many folks flock or don't flock to Georgia, how things change if there is a spike, because I just don't see, because I would say on a lot of the bigger projects in Georgia, you probably had 30 or 40% crew from New York or LA. I just don't see people getting on a bus to head to Georgia if things spike in 4 or 5 weeks. Because if things spike there, I mean, they've been hit hard. They're going to get hit harder, a lot of us think. So the fact that they've got a 35 or 40% incentive is not going to matter to people. They're going to find a way to shoot it in LA or Wyoming. They're not going to be going to places that have a huge incentive, but also huge numbers of cases. I mean, to me, there's all kinds of numbers out there. I go by the number of people who die. I don't really care about hospital admissions or cases, because with testing, there's more people going to be showing positive. To me, it's about how many people are dying every day of COVID. And that's the key number. And I just don't see any percentage that's going to entice anybody above the line, below the line to hop on a plane if cases are still going, if number of deaths are still going up somewhere.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree as well. Another question here from Saskia Duff, who asks, I would like to know the opinion on day players or cast on set for only 1 or 2 days. Do you think small scale productions can get away with this in the near future? Sam, you're sort of shaking your head there.
Small, that's why I was saying we're adapting scripts to bring, we're saying that, you know, no visitors to set, I mean, that presents a problem for PR and the press and public relations and how we deal with that, but that's another issue. But just bringing people onto set, it's not happening. So why would you bring someone for 1 day onto set, or you engage them for 2 weeks and you say you're coming on for 1 day, but for 2 weeks you're self-isolating, and then you bring them onto set. So maybe, yes, maybe there is a world where you have your day players, but they're, instead of being employed for a day, they're employed for 3 weeks. And they come and play for a day. That's the way around it, isn't it?
There's not going to be any more, hey, get me a techno crane tomorrow.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's all about planning, Mike. You've got, we have to plan as production, we have to plan. And therefore, everyone else is now going to have to plan. And if you want your techno crane, you can have it for the 22 weeks. Can you afford it? No. So let's just think about another route. And there's a world out there where we can still make exciting things. It's just a different mindset, and the mindset isn't just have it all, but we'll have it all whenever we want. No, you won't. You're going to sit down and think about it, which is great because that's what it's needed.
I think the Mandalorian,
solvers, right?
Sorry,
producers are problem solvers. So this is like, you know, what more could we ask for?
Yeah.
Back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, the Mandalorian method. I had a producer call me yesterday. He's making a $25 to $28 million movie, and they're talking about employing those technologies, those techniques, which they never would have thought about 6 months ago, because they were too expensive. It's the only way for him to make his movie now. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for new technology and new technicians to make their way into the business, and a lot of old dinosaurs are going to make their way out of the business.
I totally agree with you. It's like now where you can go to certain people and say, where's your harness? No, I've been doing this for 25 years. I don't need a harness. Oh, right. Interesting. It's a different way of thinking. You don't need an assistant and a charge hand and a supervisor. You just need one of you. Okay, go in. In you go. Thanks. Bye. Because people aren't going to wear it. They're not going to be wearing 20, 30 people surrounding one person. No, not going to happen. Yeah. Sorry to be negative.
No, it's a good point, though. We've got another question through here from Caroline O'Reilly. She's asking, a friend of mine here in the UK has already been approached to work on a film later on in the year, and they openly admitted they couldn't get insurance. Is this wise to work on an uninsured shoot?
Insurance against COVID, I would imagine, because it still has insurance, I'm sure, on a lot of other things.
I imagine so.
The big studios are going to self-insure. And they'll still have insurance for car accidents, for things breaking or a set falling over. But COVID interruption, it's not going to happen. So your small independents are going to get massacred. They're not going to be able to they're not going to be able to self-insure. So it's a huge risk, which goes back to what Mike was saying about waivers and the viability of a waiver. It's not going to happen, I don't think. So it's a risk. You've got to take a risk. You're going to be uninsured for the COVID. You'll still be insured for everything else. It's the COVID thing for interruptions on set. So you'll still get your weather interruptions or someone breaking a leg or whatever.
Yeah.
You're not going to get it for COVID anymore.
Okay, interesting. And extending from that, we've got another question here from Keith Sickat asking, For those countries, it's quite a long question, for those countries where the curve has not been flattened and tests still unavailable on a wider scale, but where the government is encouraging production to begin soon, besides a 14-day quarantine period of cast crew prior to a lockdown shoot, what other measures can be taken to ensure the safety of production personnel?
Not go there. That's simple.
Yeah.
It's very, very simple.
No way.
People will be scared.
Assess the risks. Yeah.
Yeah.
No way.
Will producers potentially look at smaller alternative locations, as I asked before? I mean, do you think that, you know, there are places that perhaps are safer they wouldn't have thought of before, but will have to now? Mike, you're nodding your head there.
To me, that's the number one criteria. Is the city, state, country safe? However you define safe. That's the discussion starts with that. We'll talk about incentives and ability to get there easily and things like that. But if it's not safe, people aren't getting on the bus or the plane or the train to go there. I just don't think so.
I think that's the issue. I think what you're doing is doubling your risk. And ultimately, you know, traveling somewhere increases your risk, exposure, the chances of getting COVID. And I really think, as I said, you know, I'll say again, is that ultimately, you know, people will be effectively staying at home. They'll be staying around. They won't be traveling around, or, you know, or effectively overseas travel. It's going to be a real tough ride. But I think everyone's going to be looking to see, how can I do this either at home or nearby? And that's what we're looking to do. I mean, you know, getting on a plane is going to be tough, and it's going to be a big call, especially when, you know, I think some of the airlines have got, well, we'll just check your temperature. We'll check your temperature just before you get on, and wear a mask on the plane and all this stuff. And I'm like, I think it's going to be a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
You know, that's just, I mean, that's all high risk, especially at this particular time. And as you pointed out, Chris, I mean, the bottom line is that there are other countries in the world that probably haven't even seen, you know, the levels that we have in the UK, and that may yet to come. We don't know.
And I think, you know, like you were saying, you know, when you start looking at different areas and locations, you'll be able to drill down, and it'll be the producer's job to look at almost a county by county. Let's say in the U.S., when we have our counties and states, you know, here's the state of Florida. There are these counties in the state of Florida that maybe have really high levels, but then these counties, they've got, you know, 100 people is the only number or whatever. You're going to start examining and really drilling down to finite details to find where are the safest places to go shoot.
I think you're going to.
It's a film hub for sure.
I think you're going to find cast and crew and EP and some of these other entities that put together the guides on incentives, putting together COVID guides, and there'll be online, active, constantly changing guides to production, for production, with all the specific statistics that somebody needs to have in front of them before they can consider a location. Yeah. Hey, I think I just came up with a new business.
Yeah, well done. There's another question actually come through from a lot of different people. They're asking, we are getting queries from international companies who are wanting to use live streaming for shoots in order that the director can stay at home. Could this be a viable solution to traveling?
Yeah,
it is for commercials for sure. It's already happening. The remote, referring to remote film production, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. That is exactly what's happening with our partners in all these different countries where I say live action is being filmed. It's principally the commercial productions, which are on a much shorter timeline. They're already churning and starting to turn around projects. And they, of course, you know, creatives during COVID have been thinking about how to do things in much more limited. I mean, basically everything that we've been talking about on a broader, grander scale and calendar that takes us into the fall at earliest shooting. Commercials have been turning this around in a matter of a couple months. So they're coming out of it right now, and they're already shooting. And this is exactly the kind of consideration they're doing is using the technologies at hand to actually connect both you know, brand, agency stakeholders, and oftentimes even a director. Although honestly, I think that's really pushing it for the long format scripted that relies so much more on dialogue. Having the director on set is really hard to replace.
Agreed. And there's a final question through. What should different countries do to attract foreign productions back? Is it safety measures on set? Is it low numbers of COVID spread? Is it the local government's assurance of help when needed? Tony, perhaps if you start on that one.
All of the above. answered their own question in the question there. It's going to be a stepped approach, and having, up to producers to really evaluate where they want to go, and they're going to examine all those factors to decide if it's safe. And like we talked a little bit about earlier, some of that's going to depend on the unions. If you're using SAG talent, are they willing to travel? Are they able to travel? It's going to be all of those different factors, and then knowing that somewhere has a plan in place, to self-promote what we're doing here in Florida. Florida has this recommended policies and procedures, and people are already starting to look at that and figure out ways to implement it. And this is a creative industry. We're talking about the nuts and bolts behind it, but now it's up to our creative people to come up with creative ways to keep people safe and to move forward with production.
Fantastic. Mike, do you want to come in there?
Yes, everything that Tony just said. I mean, it's going to be all about safety. The emphasis on incentives is going to drop to second or third or fourth place. Ultimately, the crew want to feel safe, so they're going to be looking at all kinds of factors, and that's going to be, until there's a vaccine or a really effective treatment that's proven. That's the one thing people are going to care about. They're not going to care about money.
Suresh, do you agree? Oh, sorry, yeah, Sam, you'd agree. And Suresh, likewise, is it about sort of the medical side of things being important?
Absolutely. Look, guys, I think I think the key thing is just trying to remain safe and de-risk as much as possible. So that and it's always going to be one of those things. If you can do things by effectively not exposing yourself in a way which gives, in terms of the prevalence of the virus, just do it. I think, as I said before, the number one thing is the vaccination.
Fantastic. All right. Well, listen, thank you so much, guys. You've been brilliant. Thank you for your time today and providing excellent insights. Thank you also to our sponsor, the St. Petersburg Clearwater Film Commission, and of course to you, the audience, for listening and for your great questions. Just so you know, this talk will be available to watch in full on Screen Daily and KFTV.com from tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Great chat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Nice to meet
Thank
everybody.
you very much.
Between you all.